Can you believe it? There are just 9 days to go now till Britain heads to the polls. Last night, if I say so myself, was a pivotal moment in this election. We hosted our leaders in our Sun Showdown, and it was a night of sharp blows. We pressed RISHI Sunak and Keir Starmer for some answers. Running the country properly, your closest aide, your bodyguard, your campaign manager and your head of data are all being investigated for what is essentially insider trading. Is that proper?
What I can tell you is, in parallel, we have been conducting internal inquiries of our own into the situation and won't hesitate to act when information or findings come to light.
Surely that can't take too long. You just ask everyone in the room if they put a bet on when they found out about the election. You were there. You must know who you told, right? And our readers certainly didn't pull their punches either. Why do people like J.K. Rowling think that you've accused you of abandoning women, Labour of abandoning women? What's gone wrong there?
Look, I respect what she says, and I think I welcome the debate.
She said that Labour are behaving like a husband who's cheating on his wife but expects her to be OK with it because he always takes the bins out.
Well, look...
What do you think she meant by that?
Well, look, I actually do really respect what she said. I've looked at it very...
meeting with her? Are you going to try and bring her back? She used to be a Labour donor. Joining me from Never Mind the Ballots, Election Showdown, the after party, is the Sun on Sunday's Kate Ferguson, and once again, our friends from JLP Partners, co-founder James Johnson and director Scarlett Maguire. Morning, gang.
Morning.
I hear you bought your worm.
Ask James.
Well, we will look at James's worm once again in intimate detail. Kate, you were sitting in this chair last night. You hosted the sort of post-match dust-up. Who do you think came out on top?
I thought Rishi was the more aggressive of the two.
Talked about that, strong man.
Yeah.
Strong little man.
I said he needed to land some blows. He definitely did come with some lies to try and land those blows. That one he signed off with, which is they'll be queuing up in Calais if Starmer gets.
Nice alliteration there.
It's a nice little line that he landed. I thought that it felt, didn't it, that Starmer was probably the Prime Minister in waiting.
Let's have a look at the first reaction from our worm. JJ's worm is here. So let's look at the first clip. I haven't actually seen any of these, so I have no idea what the worm is going to show. We're going to have a live reaction to it. And let me guess, it's about betting.
Well, I was incredibly angry when I learned about the allegations, as everybody would be when they would hear about something like that. Now,
why haven't you suspended?
Well, just to explain, so the Gambling Commission who are investigating these, as well as the police, obviously are independent of me, of government. I don't have access to the details of their investigation. They don't report to me. But what I can tell you is, in parallel, we have been conducting internal inquiries of our own into the situation and won't hesitate to act when information or findings come to light.
Surely that can't take too long. You just ask everyone in the room if they put a bet on when they found out about the election. You were there. You must know who you told, right? JJ, good morning. How are you?
Very good, very good. The worm is back.
The worm is back, and it looks angry.
It does look angry. It looks a little anemic there.
Yes.
We've got anemic worms. What we can see here is you can see Rishi Sunak's attempts to argue about his defence on the betting. You can see he's not really getting the Conservative 2019 line, a key line, quite over the line. It's sort of getting close, but never quite there. You can see sort of just close to the middle line there. Remember, what we're seeing here is we've asked a representative sample of 1,000 people around the country to record their positive or negative reaction to the debates. This is split by Conservative 2019, Labour 2019 voters. Rishi Sunak in his defence here on betting, not quite sealing the deal.
Thanks, JJ. Betgate. Are we calling it Betgate?
Gamblingate.
Gamblegate. Bookies Gate. I mean, everything's a gate now. Scarlett, it's 13, 14 days now since this story broke. How bad is it? Are you hearing it in focus groups? Are you getting it sort of fed back to you from wavering voters? How bad is it for the PM?
I think it is bad. I think it's definitely cut through. Actually, not that many things from this campaign have cut through.
Yeah.
I think the things you can point to are Nigel Farage returning, D-Day, and now this. And so
what
if you
about,
think about
the PM announcing the election from the shower?
Exactly. I think that was no, so he didn't get off to a great start, but this is the last thing he needs. So we actually have heard it in focus groups. We did a focus group in Rishi Sunak's own constituency with former Conservative voters, and they were very unimpressed. And in fact, one woman even made the parallel herself between this and Partygate, sort of saying it shows a disregard for voters, that it's sort of one rule for them, one rule for anything else. And it's the last thing Rishi Sunak needed.
Right, let's look at another reader's reaction.
Jeremy Corbyn, there was a Labour Party which we could pick up and change and put it back. The Labour Party has done incredible things. We set up the NHS. We've done incredible things on equality, Sure Start, that made a massive difference to people's lives. I'm proud of my party, and I knew there'd be a day after where we needed to pick our party up, to say to the electorate in 2019, we got this wrong, and rebuild. And we were all working to that end. I'm glad we had that opportunity, because I genuinely think now at this election, there is a choice. The Prime Minister was saying there's a choice. We've had 14 years now of chaos, of division and failure, and it's not going to change, because if you think their election campaign is anything other than chaos and division, it is characterising them, that isn't going to change. Or we can turn the page and start to rebuild our country.
JJ, I mean, greatest hits from Keir Starmer there. These are 2019 Labour voters. They're the people that actually voted for Jeremy Corbyn, right? They loved all that. But look at that, the 2019 vote, Tory, on the Tory side, not interested in Labour's greatest hits.
Tories not convinced, and I think if you look at the lines here, you can see, he's basically got a split sort of ticket in sense of reactions to it. I think this shows the sort of the difficult, line that the sort of difficult line that Keir Starmer's trying to tread, the difficult worm Keir Starmer's trying to tread here, because the Labour voters on the 2019 side, if he started criticising Corbyn, these guys would probably start going down. Instead, he's just sort of having to sort of appease them, and the Conservative voters aren't that impressed either.
Thanks, JJ. Scarlett, I mean, that is the difficult worm, as JJ so delicately put it. But, he is trying to... I thought he put a lot of distance between him and Corbyn yesterday. And I thought it was really interesting when he started praising Boris Johnson. I know that was probably, some readers liked Boris Johnson. Do you think he's at risk of being trying to be too many different things to too many different people?
That is something that people bring up about him, certainly. I do think that it's been something that's not been consistent through the campaign. So I think if you think before the campaign started, I think Keir Starmer had definitely succeeded in putting clear blue water between him and Jeremy Corbyn. It's actually something we did hear a lot in focus groups at the time when he expelled him from the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Yeah.
And I think that was a fight they were very, very willing to have. And it actually went down very well with voters to say, we've moved on, we've changed, you can trust us again. It's then interesting to me that some of his appearances on his campaign seem to be rowing back on it, but then changing his mind again, and it's sort of lacking that consistency.
Okay, I thought he was still slightly all over the shop on, the manifesto that he said was, a vision of hope and integrity, or whatever the exact quote was, and then he was trying to use the Jeremy Corbyn manifesto to try and duff up Rishi Sunak last week. He does need to sort of pick a side, right?
Yeah, I think Jeremy Corbyn is the bit that you find Keir Starmer squirming the most on.
Yeah.
I don't think he's at ease with the fact that he served on the front bench when people in his own front bench.
Well, Rachel Reeves, Wes Streeting, they sat that one out, right?
If you ask me, and I also don't think his initial explanation, which is I didn't think he would win, it's okay, was a good one, because it makes him out to be a flip-flopper, a liar, or whatever. And we heard that last night in the debate. I think actually kind of Keir's best argument with this, right, is to say, look, I wanted to save my party, I stayed, I fought, there's an argument for that. I thought long and hard about it. That's what I decided to do. But he's never actually really said that, frankly.
He tried to say it last night, but isn't the problem, and I'm not going to swear because it's too early in the morning, but isn't the fact that that's just basically nonsense?
Right.
Because he stuck around to stop Brexit. He stuck around because he wanted a second referendum. And actually, the fact is, the nub is, and I think what readers picked up on last night is actually, was Brexit more important, stopping Brexit more important to Keir Starmer than, anything else, including putting the guy who wanted to turn the army into a Peace Corps in charge of our nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, but as I say, I think voters are very kind of yet to be convinced by his analysis of this, his explanation of this, rather.
The trust,
you saw that last night.
The trust thing, really, you could feel it in the room. There's sort of the scepticism when he was sort of wavering a bit on that. It is very live. Let's have a look at another worm. JJ's worm is back. Right, let's have a look at Sunak's comments on Broken Britain.
Of course, it's been difficult the last few years, and that's made everything a bit more challenging, particularly the NHS, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But I also, look, I'm not for one second taking away from the things that you're saying, but I don't think it's right to say that we haven't made progress in 14 years. I simply don't believe that. Now, of course, that's what the Labour Party are going to say, but I'll just give you one example. Just one example. I think education, schools, is probably the most important thing a government can do to transform people's lives, is to provide every young person with a phenomenal education. And if you look at 14 years, what Conservatives have done, we've ensured that our school children in this country, in England, are not just the best readers in the United Kingdom, they're the best readers in the Western world.
JJ, people tell me all the time around Rishi Sunak that he hasn't done enough to praise the last 14 years of Conservative government. And right there, you can see it on that worm. Tory voters like them talking about Tory successes. They like them, the education reforms, all of that. The data's there. Why hasn't Rishi Sunak been out there banging the drum about all of the last 14 years, not just the last 2 years where he saved everything? I mean, the data's there for him, right?
Well, I think you can see on there that, he struggles a bit with the initial answer. People are not... they're broadly quite receptive to your question, Harry. They broadly sort of respond quite negatively. It's only when he gets to education that we start seeing it rise. Rishi Sunak is sort of like a snake charmer here, the worm charmer, trying to get it to come to life, and he does succeed on education. Now, I think that it's difficult for the Conservatives because, in other polling, we've seen that people think the Conservatives have failed on almost every policy area over the last 14 years. It is worth noting, though, that education is one of those they think they've done better, and I think we see that here when Rishi Sunak manages to charm the worm over the line.
Thanks, JJ. Scarlett, conference speech last October, was it? When Rishi Sunak attacked 30 years of failed political consensus. Tories have been in power for the last 14 years of that, almost half of that. Have they trashed their own brand? Has he trashed his own brand?
I think that probably didn't help his own brand, but I also basically think it's just as James was saying, it's quite hard to overcome the fact that the public really do think they failed on pretty much everything. In fact, I think we did show everything, even if they did do better on education. I think the part of the problem is, yes, he can make a positive case for education. He can't, and you saw him there, he wasn't going to. He wasn't making a positive case on the things that are people's actual priorities. Yeah. So obviously education is important, but we know when we ask people time and time again, the things that matter to them are the economy, the health service, immigration. He's reluctant to talk about his triumphs there, partly because he's not met the 5 pledges that he brought in when he first became Prime Minister. But then I think that makes it, that sort of gets to the crux of why this is a really difficult campaign for him. Before you get to things like D-Day and Gamblegate, is that he's fighting on this really, he's batting this really, really sticky wicket. It's very hard for him to trumpet 14 years of success when people, think the complete opposite.
Okay, crumbling schools, crap hospitals, rivers full of poo. Like, it's not exactly like a vision of Singapore on Thames, Brexit, Britain unleashed, flying around the world, is it? Is there anything he can do you think, to really... Obviously, he just left it way too late to make the case that actually the last 14 years haven't been a dystopian nightmare.
Well, look, I think the problem here is that the only bit of the public sector, I suppose, that people would recognise or that he has a real case to argue for is education. Yeah. It's phonics. Phonics is like a kind of weird thing to understand, right? He needs to say we're better at teaching kids to read. But if you look at what people are getting in the NHS, their housing, people don't feel things have improved. Yeah. And actually, I guess the thing that the Tories would say is, look, we did a slightly different job, right? They would say...
patched up the economy.
Patched up the economy.
Fix the roof after the storm. Exactly.
And actually, I was going to say, you found this a bit last night with Rishi when he was talking about his immigration reforms. Yeah. But you can't trumpet that too much because it's not brought numbers right down yet.
Also, the second you start talking about immigration, right, Nigel Farage goes, not enough.
Exactly.
Let's look at the NHS now. Let's see how the readers reacted to Starmer's comments on the NHS.
I do know what I'm talking about when it comes to acute care in high dependency units. I know what it looks like, I know what it feels like, and I absolutely know it's the best place if you've got a life-threatening situation. Look, I'm not going to say to other people that's the choice that they should make. And the bigger choice, the bigger discussion that we're not really having here, which is important, is why are so many people having to now go private because they're having to wait so long on the NHS? Because the hard-working people who are having to use their money, their savings, for operations which they ought to be able to get on the NHS much more quickly. It's the hidden tax in the NHS that we've got from this government. I want to end that.
JJ, 9 days to save the NHS, as the old Labour campaigns used to say around this point of every election since about 1945. Doesn't do badly for him, does it? Even the Tories were sort of reacting positively to nice words about the NHS.
Yeah, I think this is a strong point, Harry, for Keir Starmer here. You can see the Labour voters are going up the more he talks about it, and you're absolutely right. This was an area of what seemed like weakness on Keir Starmer. This question of whether he should have, whether he'd prioritised private or state care for an ill or dying relative, and you can see that actually the Conservatives aren't going right down in response to them. They don't like it, but they also don't hate it, and I think Keir Starmer will take that as a win. NHS is always Labour's strongest territory. The more Keir Starmer's talking about this in this campaign, the better it is for him.
Scarlett, I've banged on about this a lot, but the idea that it's Nixon in China, it's, only Labour can fix the NHS. It should be talking about it more, right? It's almost like it isn't, previous election campaigns, Miliband, I remember, by this point, 9 days to go, it was all about the NHS, Surely there's a sort of open goal there from that data, right?
Yeah, well, I think there is and there isn't. That was actually, I think, a very good way of him talking about it, because it wasn't, I think, the problem with some of the comments he made before about the loved one in waiting list.
He sort of rewrote history a bit last night, saying, well, I never said that, I was talking about waiting lists. But
I think that was a better line, because that expressed empathy for anyone who does go private, for example, and something that we do hear, I think, quite a lot of people who never considered going private before are starting to, because they think the NHS is in such a state. But I think the problem is for Labour, and this is something that I'm sure they'll be, they'll obviously be grappling with in their first 100 days, is that, yes, it is a clear win for Labour, always has been, to talk about the NHS. That's the thing that does well. I think they don't quite know what they're going to do to fix it, because it is in such a state. Yeah. And I think that there's that tension there between, yes, you can talk about it a lot, but then you have to say what you're going to do. And I think that there's this thing that the public are very aware that some big decisions about spending or reform are going to have to be made. Yeah. The public aren't stupid. They know exactly what's going on. And so that's probably why they're not talking about it quite as much.
Okay, it feels like Wes Streeting is almost like, not quite the canary in the coal mine, but like he's like going further and further on use of private sector reform. We need to do this. And actually he feels like he's dragging Starmer with him a bit. Like last week when he on the private healthcare stuff, Streeting was straight out the blocks in the morning, the next morning, say, well, I did consider private healthcare when I had cancer X, Y, Z. It feels like he's being pulled by the sort of Blairite faction, the reformists, the sort of the Michael Goves almost of the Labour Party.
Well, I mean, Wes has always been allowed to be that outrider.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that Keir
gives him cover.
It gives him cover, but it's interesting that Keir gave him the NHS job.
Yeah.
Because it does suggest that they are going to look at this idea of reform. The big question is how big an oil tanker is this to turn around? Yeah. You can't even introduce computerization in some of these hospitals because the whole thing goes
billions of pounds on stamps.
Exactly. So it's a huge task. Interestingly, Wes did an interview with us the other day, and he says he called for those junior doctor strikes to be called off. Yeah. Now this is going to be one of the first things in his intro, right? Like, how do you actually get them to
open the
call
wallet,
off the strike?
or do they?
They've not got all this money.
The whole get round the table thing, it's be found out very quickly, right?
Well, I mean, really, I suppose they're hoping that a Labour government will be able to persuade them, but these junior doctors are pretty militant, and that may well be pie in the sky.
But this whole idea there's going to be like a whole vibe shift because Labour are going to suddenly be in power, and like the EU are going to just kind of roll over and have their tummies tickled and renegotiate the entire of Brexit, and the junior doctors are going to drop their 35%. It's nonsense, right?
Yeah, and also, a lot of these unions or Royal Colleges, their leadership has become a lot more militant. You're just dealing with different people now.
I got told off because I called the BMA. I used a rude word about the BMA, which I won't repeat here, but I'll just do that. And finally, here's Sunak making the case for your votes. Let's have a look, see how it went.
In the next Parliament, if I'm not your Prime Minister, every pensioner is going to be paying a retirement tax for the first time in this country's history. That won't happen if I'm your Prime Minister. If I'm not your Prime Minister, you're all going to be paying thousands of pounds to upgrade your home, switch out your boiler, change your car, because Keir Starmer's going to reverse all the changes I made so we get to net zero in a sensible way. Those illegal migrants will not be on planes to Rwanda. They will be out on our streets putting pressure on public services. And, by the way, I can tell you now, they are queuing up in Calais waiting for a Starmer government so they can come here and stay here. That is the choice.
JJ, I mean, positive vibes there for Tory voters. They liked the sort of stuffing up of Labour there. And I tell you what, the Labour guys really didn't like the idea of, an retirement tax.
No, Labour voters did not respond well to this. But again, maybe that's not surprising. This is Rishi Sunak's call to his base, call to arms. I have to say, though, Harry, I think that Rishi Sunak would have been hoping to do a bit better than this. This is meant to be his final peroration in this debate, his real appeal to the Conservative 2019 vote. Again, Harry, anemic worms. It's barely over the middle line. I mean, Conservative 2019 voters, these people voted Tory last time. You really want that to be soaring at the end. I don't think Rishi Sunak would be too happy with that result.
Thanks, JJ. Anemic worms, I think I saw them at Reading in about 2003. But that really is, JJ's right though, that was the big flourish, right, Scarlett? That was the 9 days to go, you should be like, hang on. I did like queuing up at Calais. I think that works. I think that's, but But is it too little too late? Or?
It's too little too late. And again, this gets the problem that Rishi Sunak has this campaign. So we've seen it's difficult for him to talk in the past tense about the Conservatives' achievements. It's now become increasingly difficult for him to talk about the future tense too, because people don't believe he's going to be here to do it. And so it's that slight... So exactly. And so there's a bit of a problem where he can't really talk about what he's done, and he can't talk about what he's going to do, because no one thinks he's going to do it, and it starts to look a bit silly. And I think that's part of what's going on there too.
I thought it was really interesting. I was like, Kate, I know you were down here, but you were watching. But Keir Starmer had a confidence to him that I haven't seen. I mean, when he sat in that chair, exactly that chair, about 6 months ago, 3 months ago, well, 10 years ago, who knows how long it was. But, you know, on the first ever launch of Never Mind the Ballots, when he sat right there, he was guarded, he was saying, but actually he was much more confident. And it was really interesting. I would never give anyone a swivel chair ever again, because what he spent most of the debate last night trying to do was just swivel away from me. He wasn't even looking at me. He was just going for it.
Yeah.
And he did get a kicking from some of them once you open yourself up to the reader too. But Rishi, you know, I think it was better last night, but like, really too little too late?
Yeah, you get the sense that Keir Starmer has grown in confidence.
I mean, he's literally measuring curves.
Yeah, and really so are the people around him, right? There's only 9 days to go. It looks like they're home straight with a whopping majority. They wouldn't say that out loud. Supermajority. But yeah, I saw him do this last night. In the audience. In the audience. This is like such confidence from a political leader, right? Like they command the room, you don't. It speaks
Which is kind of, I mean, if he is going to win, that's kind of what you want, you know? You don't want him like, you know, if he's going to do it properly, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, to go back to the worm.
The anemic worm.
I guess like all Rishi's left with really is this Labour attack, right? Being scared of Labour. I also like that last line, Labour queuing up in Calais, but because it's like quite a journalistic line. But it's interesting that worm stays so low. Maybe people want to have a more positive vision of the future.
There was an element, though, of some people, and some of them were related to me because they came with me last night to watch it, but there were people that walked into that room thinking they had made up their minds and actually thought Rishi did better than they were expecting him to do. Do you think there's a sort of element, and Scarlett, I'd be fascinated to know your thoughts on this, is there an element of this election campaign has been so dire for Rishi Sunak that actually it's a bit cringe to say you're going to vote Tory, and it's a bit cringe to think that actually, like, oh, you know, but in the privacy of the ballot box, how much scope is there for people to actually, all that stuff about supermajorities, all that stuff about trust, is he ready? The shy Tory, the 92 thing, is it real? Could it come back?
I think there is...
I don't think they're going to win, but could it not be the wipeout we think?
I think it's not so much even about the shy Conservatives, so people actively sort of lying to pollsters and saying, I'm not going to vote for them, but then secretly thinking, all right, I'm going to go and do that anyway. I think it's more that there's a genuine uncertainty and volatility amongst some voters who have decided, but also some voters who are currently telling us they don't know. And I really do think we don't actually quite know how they'll vote. It does seem like the supermajority line could work. You hear it from people saying, like, even 1 in 4 Labour voters say they don't want a Labour supermajority. We know it appeals to Reform voters and to Conservative 2019 voters. It's whether that's enough on the day, and I think we just actually won't quite know that. We'll have a better sense in the last few days of the campaign, but I don't think we can quite know that yet.
Your pollsters, I'm going to have to ask this question. JJ, I'm going to throw this one to you because it's mean. Half the pollsters are going to look like idiots on July the 5th, aren't they? Because the range between the pollsters now is huge. They can't all be right.
They are indeed. I was just saying this to a colleague this morning that, you know, JL Partners, a couple of other pollsters, we are a bit out on our own because, you know, we're a bit more generous to the Conservatives in our polling. We've got the Conservatives on around 23 to 25% in our latest few polls. Some pollsters have them down at 18, 17, 19 points. So now we think that's right because we think we're taking into account those undecideds that Scarlett's just been speaking about, those people who currently say they don't know but could end up voting Conservative on the day. Also, a big question is, where does Reform UK poll? Do they get up to close to 20% or do they get closer to 10%? We're currently saying around the middle of that range. But yeah, look, it's a big scrutiny on the pollsters. I think one thing that the pollsters will be grasping onto is that nobody's going to be predicting the wrong overall result.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's saying that might be me trying to hedge there, but
they tend, towards the end of the campaign, they all tend to slightly budge. I wouldn't dare question the pollsters.
Never happened with JL Partners.
They all tend to get there in the end. JJ, get some sleep. I hear you're off to America?
I'm off to the presidential debate in Atlanta on Thursday night, but back for the UK election, worry not.
Good. Well, come back and see us probably on election night, next morning, who knows? But I'm going to come and mark your homework. JJ, thank you. Scarlett Maguire, thank you. Kate Ferguson. Should we go to the pub? Is it time for a McDonald's
Early,
breakfast?
isn't it? Yeah, maybe McMuffin.
Joining me now, former Defence Secretary, Dr. Liam Fox. Morning, Liam. How are
Morning,
you?
how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Did you catch the debate last night?
I'm sitting in a gloriously warm and sunny morning in Somerset. What's to complain about?
I mean, that sounds pretty good. Did you catch the debate last night?
Yes, I caught most of it. I was out and about.
Who do you think came up on top? I know what you're going to say.
Who do you think I think?
I think you thought Keir
the key thing
Starmer
about
was, open, honest, trustworthy, cleared up all the Brexit nonsense, and is ready to lead, right?
Yeah, no, I thought he was. I thought he was not clear, especially about his support for Jeremy Corbyn and what it meant. What I thought was really interesting was the Prime Minister saying that a general election is not a referendum on how much you like or dislike any one individual or a government, and it's not a by-election. It's about the choice we will make for the country's future, the people of our country, the young people of our country, for the next 5 years, and also the sort of interaction Britain is going to have internationally at a time of great and rising international danger. I thought it was really good that he mentioned that. I actually thought last night's performance, he seemed more confident and in charge and self-assured than perhaps he's been at any time during the whole campaign.
What do you think that is, though? Because obviously he was down in the dumps after D-Day. Obviously he took a kicking there, and obviously he's sort of. There's betting scandals still swirling around him. Is it the fact that we're heading into the last 9 days of this campaign that's giving him a bit of a boost, or is he sort of thinking, might as well go down swinging, right?
It was, I think, when he said during the debate about the Conservatives providing solutions, that was quite important. And of course, you get a round of applause from your audience. And I think that one of the things that has sort of become clear during the campaign is that Labour talk a lot about the problems. They talk about the problems of young people, the problems of old people, the problems of business, where the Conservatives are saying, well, here are the solutions. We take young people out of stamp duty to help them on the housing ladder. We protect elderly people from tax by our triple lock plus for pensions. We help small businesses. We provide solutions by taking the self-employed out of national insurance altogether. And I think that a lot of it seems a great deal of waffle from Labour and a great deal of obfuscation, central to that being that their spending plans are from day one. And they say they will fund that from growth. Well, growth doesn't happen on day one, even if they're successful in achieving growth, which I would argue is unlikely. That comes much later. So the question is, and the question which has been unanswered and people ask on the doorstep is, well, if they're going to spend all this money from day one, where does it come from in the gap? And the answer, of course, is tax.
No, I do agree there was an element of shiftiness on the tax front. One thing that didn't really come up last night, there's sort of a bit of an elephant in the room, a blazered elephant with colourful ties, was Nigel Farage. How's reform doing down where you are? Are you feeling the heat there?
No, we're not really feeling a huge amount of reform, and they've certainly gone backwards. I was in Northamptonshire briefly yesterday, and where they had been seemingly doing well a week ago, they seem to be dropping back, according to the people I was talking to on the doorstep. I think a big part of that has been Nigel Farage saying yesterday that Boris Johnson was the worst Prime Minister of all time. Of course, he was very pally with Boris Johnson at one point. And people that were saying, well, whatever you think of Boris, that was a way over the top attack. And much more importantly, was what Nigel Farage had been saying about Ukraine. Now, as you said at the beginning, as a former Defence Secretary, I think it's completely irresponsible and completely unacceptable to try to make the case that there's a moral equivalence between NATO, a peaceful organisation of sovereign democratic countries who come together in a defence pact, and the Soviet Union, which is an internal brutal dictatorship, which abuses human rights, which has invaded Georgia, annexed Crimea, and continues to rain down death
on that
on the
point,
people
though,
of Ukraine. There is no moral equivalence here. We did not provoke the war. We did not provoke the war in Ukraine.
NATO
did not
comments,
provoke the war in
though.
Ukraine. The West did not provoke it.
Dr. Fox, park the comments on Ukraine per se, but the allegation from Nigel Farage that Boris Johnson was a hypocrite is kind of fair, because I remember the front pages in 2016 during the Brexit referendum when one Boris Johnson said that EU expansion and ever-growing sort of NATO pressure was to blame for the annexation of Crimea. I mean, he said it himself, right?
Well, I thought that was, as I said yesterday, I thought that was tosh then, and I think it's tosh now.
Yeah, but I mean, the point is, Boris Johnson coming out swinging at Nigel Farage, I know there's bad blood there over the deal they did in 2019, but on the hypocrisy, he's got a point, right?
Well, I think Boris Johnson was wrong on that, but I think for Nigel Farage to say Boris Johnson was the worst Prime Minister of all time.
I mean, there's been a few of them of late.
It showed how thin-skinned.
I mean, there's quite a few to pick from, right?
How thin-skinned he was. But I think there's a bigger issue here, if I may, which is that it's not just that it plays into the hands of Putin and it gives Putin an excuse and say, well, you see, I was provoked by NATO. It's actually a dangerous worldview, because what it says is that sovereign countries, and I campaigned to leave the European Union, and I'm pleased that we did, because we were able to make decisions for ourselves. And I think it's really quite striking that the argument gets made that Britain should be able to make its own decisions. Western European countries should be able to make their own decisions about how they defend themselves and the allies that they have, but East European countries should not be able to do so because it might upset Russia. Yeah. I simply cannot accept that. People who've got free from the Soviet Union are perfectly entitled to whatever defence relationships they want. They are free and sovereign democratic states and have the same rights as we do.
I want to ask you a very specific question. Do you think that Nigel Farage's comments render him a fit and proper person to be an MP?
I think it would. I think he's not fit to hold high office in the United Kingdom. Whether he can overcome the first barrier and actually become an MP in 9 attempts remains to be seen. But I think the views that he represents have gone down very badly and will go down very badly with the British people, who have been, let's face it, shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine all through this, incredibly generous to the people of Ukraine themselves, and through their taxation, incredibly helpful to the government of Ukraine in defending itself against Russian aggression.
And just quickly before you go, would you welcome Nigel Farage into the Tory party in a post Sunak world?
Well, no, I don't think the people who set fire to your building are the people you want to have in as guests.
Dr. Fox, thank you for joining us on Never Mind the Ballots. Come again soon. 9 days to go. I hope we'll see you again before polling day. Thank you. This was Never Mind the Ballot Election Countdown. Remember to subscribe, youtube.com/@sunelection. And in 9 days, I will be able to say that without even stammering. Watch it there. Cheers.